Usually when the topic of the end times comes up or the apocalypse, the imagery is fairly standard.
Oh, yeah. Fire and brimstone?
Exactly, like his sun blinking out, the ocean's boiling, just the ultimate cosmic curtain drop on the whole human story.
Total destruction of the physical universe. I mean, it's a narrative that's just completely ingrained in how almost everyone reads ancient prophecy.
Right. Except the text we're looking at for today's deep dive, it actually strips away that cosmic curtain entirely.
Completely.
Yeah, so instead of fire and brimstone, it promises the birth of a, quote, new humanity, a reality where people simply stop dying and start living as long as ancient trees right here on Earth.
It's a wildly different take.
It really is.
Yeah.
So today we're opening up this highly unconventional, heavily encrypted spiritual lecture, one that just radically reinterprets ancient scriptures.
And, before we really get into the weeds here, we should probably set some ground rules.
Yeah, definitely. So for you listening, as we guide you through this, please keep in mind that we aren't endorsing these radical theologies or the intense political critiques inside them, for that matter.
Right. We're acting as impartial guides. We're just here to map the architecture of this genuinely fascinating worldview. We're not taking sides.
Exactly. We're just looking at the source material. So for you, the curious listener in the room, just suspend your standard assumptions for the next few minutes. Because we are looking at ancient words through an entirely new lens.
And to look through that lens, I mean, we really have to grasp a fundamental shift in how this speaker views the scriptures themselves.
Right, because they don't see them as standard history.
No, not at all. Texts like the Bible are not treated as straightforward historical accounts or like simple moral fables. The central premise of this lecture is that these ancient texts are entirely composed of parables.
They're like massive, complex riddles.
Yes, exactly. Riddles that were intentionally sealed away from human understanding.
It kind of reminds me of a time-locked encrypted file.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, like for centuries, people have been opening this file, reading the scriptures, and seeing either scary poetry or literal history. But only because they don't have the decryption key.
Right. The author's argument is that the texts were deliberately designed to look like gibberish, or, literal events, to protect the core message until a timer finally ticks down to a specific era.
Which they call the end times.
Exactly. But their definition of the end times is what shifts the paradigm so dramatically here, because we hear end and we assume physical destruction.
Right, the ocean's boiling.
Yeah. But the speaker uses historical political transitions to explain the true mechanism. Like, the end of the Qing dynasty was not the destruction of the planet.
It was just the transition into the Republic of China.
Exactly. And the end of that era was simply the transition into the People's Republic of China. So the end times just means a transition of power, a fundamental change in, the operating system of the world.
Which means all of that terrifying apocalyptic imagery, the falling of the sun, moon, and stars, it demands a totally different interpretation.
Right. You don't look up at the sky waiting for a cosmic disaster.
Yeah, a falling sun is just a metaphor for the fall of a supreme political leader. The transcript actually references the Kim sun in North Korea.
Yeah, or the concept of the red sun in China.
Right. As modern cultural echoes of this exact metaphor. The physical universe isn't going anywhere. It's just an old human era collapsing to make way for a new one.
And the implications of that shift are massive. I mean, the focus moves entirely from astronomical catastrophe to sociopolitical evolution.
But, setting up the scriptures as pure metaphor, it introduces a pretty profound vulnerability, doesn't it?
How do you mean?
Well, if anyone can just look at a riddle and claim, the sun needs a king, the moon means a general, then it's just a free-for-all.
That's true.
Like, anyone with a bit of charisma could invent a translation. So if anyone can guess the meaning, how do we know who has the actual, real decryption key?
Well, the speaker addresses that exact vulnerability with an incredibly rigid forensic framework. This is absolutely not a guessing game for clever theologians.
Okay, so how does it work?
The decryption key is held by a singular prophesied individual, someone explicitly moved by the Holy Spirit. And you don't just take their word for it. You subject them to a rigorous test of knowledge.
Oh, right, the physics test. This part is wild.
It really is.
The text suggests that if a religious leader stands up claiming to speak for the divine, you shouldn't just listen to their sermons. You should demand they explain quantum water.
Yeah, or ask them to casually write out the universal law of gravitation right there on a whiteboard.
Which is such a funny image. But the underlying logic there is actually kind of fascinating.
It is. The framework assumes that the creator of the universe is fundamentally, an engineer and a physicist. The spiritual realm encompasses the physical laws of nature.
So if a spiritual entity is truly speaking through an individual, they shouldn't just be spouting vague moral platitudes.
Exactly. They must possess an innate understanding of the deepest mysteries of the universe, including, subatomic fluid dynamics and astrophysics.
Basically, if they can't explain gravity, they do not hold the decryption key.
Right. But the vetting process goes way beyond a pop quiz on theoretical physics. We're talking about hyper-specific physical attributes.
Yeah, the transcript claims the arrival of this decoder was prophesied down to the exact year, month, and day.
Down to the day.
Yeah.
And it dictates their exact physical height, their weight, unique facial features, and they stress this cannot be surgically replicated.
And a geographic arrival location, accurate down to a 20-centimeter standing radius, which is just, that's incredibly specific.
Geographically, the speaker is absolutely adamant that this singular decoder must emerge from the east, specifically Asia.
And they base that on a prophecy from the book of Isaiah, right?
Right. Even though Isaiah is a text originating in the Middle East, it speaks of a bird of prey arriving from a far country.
Okay, but in this framework, I'm guessing the bird of prey is not a literal bird.
No, it functions as a metaphor for the Holy Spirit, much like the traditional imagery of a dove. And since Isaiah was writing from a Western vantage point, the speaker deduces that the far country he was looking toward was the East.
So the messenger carrying the ultimate interpretation has to be an Easterner.
Exactly.
Okay, but hold on. There is a massive contradiction staring us in the face here.
What's that?
We just spent this entire time establishing that the scriptures are a sweeping, grand metaphor, right?
Right.
The sun isn't the sun, the stars aren't the stars, the bird isn't a literal bird. But suddenly, the speaker insists that this decoder's physical standing position on Earth must be accurate to within a literal 20 physical centimeters.
Yeah, it's a stark contrast.
How do they justify mixing pure metaphorical poetry with this bizarrely literal forensic investigation?
Well, it feels like a paradox for sure. But within the speaker's architecture, the grand metaphors require an absolute hyper-literal physical anchor to tether them to human history.
Okay, so the anchor has to be real.
Right, because if everything is a metaphor, the philosophy just floats away into abstract nothingness. The 20-centimeter standing point, the exact weight, the specific face, these are the immutable coordinates where the spiritual software finally downloads into physical hardware.
Oh, I like that analogy. The software downloading to the hardware.
Yeah, without that hyper-literal grounding, the decryption simply cannot begin.
Okay, so let's assume this gravity-explaining Eastern messenger arrives, stands on their exact 20-centimeter coordinate, and inserts the key. What actually happens to the text?
Well, this unlocks the central revelation of the entire transcript. They decrypt the very foundation of the scriptures, specifically the phrase heaven and earth and the concept of all creation.
Because they point to those ancient verses describing the heavens singing, the earth rejoicing, and the trees of the forest shouting for joy.
Exactly. And the speaker argues that this is just logically impossible.
Right, because literal dirt cannot feel joy.
Precisely. The logic locks in here. Literal trees cannot shout. Even animals only make noise or roar. They do not sing complex songs of joy.
So if the text describes trees and earth rejoicing,
then heaven, earth, and trees cannot be literal flora and geology. They must be metaphors for human beings.
Wow. So the entirety of creation is literally just a code word for humanity.
Yes. And the speaker cross-references this with Eastern philosophy to solidify the mechanism. They quote Laozi from the Tao Te Ching, saying, "Heaven and earth are ruthless, treating all creation as straw dogs."
And straw dogs has a very specific historical context, right?
It does. To understand this, you have to know how straw dogs functioned in ancient Chinese rituals. They were crafted with immense care and treated with absolute reverence during the ceremony itself.
But then the moment the ritual ended,
they were just tossed into the street and trampled by the crowd.
Basically showing the complete indifference of nature, or the rulers, toward the common people.
Exactly the point the speaker is making. In Laozi's text, all creation and straw dogs simply refer to humanity, subject to the whims of the universe.
So whether analyzing Western scripture or ancient Eastern philosophy, when these texts talk about the universe, the earth, the trees, or the rivers,
they are only ever talking about people.
You know, it's exactly like reading a dense science fiction novel.
How so?
Like, imagine you're reading this massive book about an intergalactic war, and halfway through the book, you uncover a cipher that reveals the aliens is actually a code word for teenagers.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah.
Right. And if you apply that cipher, it doesn't just change the characters. Suddenly the laser blasters become high school gossip.
Yeah.
The spaceship becomes the cafeteria.
Right, it recontextualizes everything.
Exactly. The decryption key retroactively changes the meaning of every single noun on every single page. It's no longer a story about deep space. It's a story about a high school.
That's a great way to look at it. And to take that analogy further, if heaven and earth just translates to humanity, then the most famous apocalyptic prophecy of all the promise of a new heaven and a new earth doesn't mean the planet gets destroyed and replaced.
It simply means the arrival of a new humanity.
Exactly, which fundamentally changes what human salvation looks like. Because the speaker vehemently rejects the traditional religious concept of dying and your soul floating away to a spiritual heaven in the sky.
They frame that traditional idea as a total misread of the text, right?
That's complete misread. The promise, according to this decryption, is physical rejuvenation, literally returning to youth, maintaining a physical body right here on Earth.
And the text claims that in this new era, humans will live as long as trees.
Yes, the speaker specifically points out mountain trees that survive for tens of thousands of years. That immense timeline is the promised lifespan for the new humanity.
And what's really fascinating is how the speaker grounds this mystical prophecy in modern science.
Well, the life sciences connection, yeah.
Right. They bring up their own daughter, studying life sciences. And they explicitly mention Elon Musk.
Which is such an unexpected detail.
It really is. The speaker claims to have actually shared a beer with Musk in California years ago. And they note that tech billionaires are already pouring vast resources into extending human lifespans to, like, 300 years.
And the speaker views this secular technological push not as a coincidence, but as a precursor, a scientific echo proving that the spiritual reality of immortality is imminent.
It's a really striking synthesis of ancient theology and cutting-edge Silicon Valley ambition.
It is, and the demographic implications of this utopia are just staggering. The speaker cites a passage indicating that in this new world, a person dying at 100 years old would be viewed as a, quote, cursed child.
Wow, so a century of life becomes mere infancy.
Exactly. There is an end to premature death and an end to communal suffering. And importantly, this is not envisioned as some ethereal collective existence where everyone shares everything.
Right, it is a highly physical, deeply individualistic utopia. The speaker emphasizes that people will build their own physical houses to live in and plant their own private vineyards to eat the fruit from.
They deliberately frame this as the ultimate divine form of capitalism.
Yeah, the political framing here is incredibly explicit. The speaker argues that individualized ownership and the enjoyment of one's own labor is the divine ideal.
Conversely, they assert that socialism is a dying concept, an outdated operating system, and they impartially cite recent political turmoil and economic shifts in places like Peru and Cuba as, real-time evidence.
Evidence that the world is actively purging communal systems to prepare for this ultimate individualized capitalist utopia. You own what you build and you enjoy for 10,000 years.
Right.
But, practically speaking, if humans stop dying, if the exit door to humanity is essentially locked and we all live for thousands of years like giant redwoods...
Where are we going to put everyone?
Exactly. Wouldn't the Earth immediately run out of physical space? It becomes a sheer mathematical impossibility.
It's a huge logistical question.
And it highlights a deeply ironic moment in the text regarding Elon Musk. The speaker brings up Musk's desire to colonize Mars, but dismisses that ambition completely.
Because the speaker believes leaving Earth is pointless, since Earth itself is the eternal paradise.
Right. But if the tech billionaires are right about population growth, and the speaker is right that nobody dies anymore, humanity would have to colonize Mars just for the real estate.
That's a hilarious point, but it really highlights a profound collision of ultimate hopes. The secular technologist looks at the fragility of Earth and wants to escape to the stars to, back up the hard drive of humanity.
Yeah.
While the spiritual decoder looks at the exact same Earth, dismisses the stars entirely, and believes humanity's eternal destiny is rooted right here in the dirt.
It's a total clash of visions. But setting up this 10,000-year earthly utopia implies an enormous shift in human biology and society. How does the speaker claim we actually cross that bridge? Like, when does the old system shut down?
Well, according to the transcript, we are standing right on the fault line of that transition today. The speaker outlines a grand cyclical view of history using an evolutionary metaphor.
Okay.
Just as the age of the massive dominant dinosaurs had to end to create a safe environment for fragile early human beings, our current iteration of humanity, what they call the old humanity, must now end to make way for the new.
And the speaker views this old humanity through a lens of profound suffering, don't they?
They do. They describe our current existence not as a gift, but as a state of active punishment.
Yeah, the primary evidence they offer is the vivid reality of birth. When babies are born into this old humanity, they do not arrive peacefully or smiling.
No, they emerge crying and screaming as if they're being beaten.
And the speaker argues that this traumatic entry into the world is physical proof that we are trapped in a cycle of penalty and pain.
But the mechanics of this text dictate that the penalty has a strict expiration date. Based on a very specific mathematical formula hidden in the scriptures, 1 day is as 1,000 years.
Right. So if the ancient biblical narrative claims the creation of the world took 6 days, the speaker applies the cipher.
And those 6 days translate to 6,000 literal years of human history, 6 millennia of grinding through the painful old humanity.
War, disease, crying babies, all contained within this 6,000-year block of time. It functions almost like an epic multi-millennial video game.
Video game, how so?
Like humanity has been stuck on the hardest difficulty setting, just grinding through level after level of suffering for 6,000 years. And according to the speaker's timeline, we are hitting the 6,000-year mark right now. We are finally transitioning into the 7th day.
Ah, I see. Yes, and in the ancient texts, the 7th day is the Sabbath, right? The day of rest.
Exactly.
By applying the formula, the 7th millennium becomes a 1,000-year period of rest. It is the designated block of time where the suffering shuts off and the new, joyful, immortal humanity officially begins.
It's the ultimate save point. And this is actually where the speaker weaves their own personal journey into the cosmic timeline, introducing a really fascinating mechanism of reincarnation.
Right, because they claim to have met their current audience across 7 different lifetimes, returning once every 1,000 years.
Which is just a staggering claim.
It is. The framework suggests that consciousness doesn't simply disappear, it cycles back millennium after millennium, accumulating readiness.
And the speaker tracks their own geographic and spiritual journey, noting how they were compelled to move from Hong Kong back to the United States and finally drawn relentlessly to Beijing.
They describe arriving in the heavy, thick smog of Beijing, which they actually reframe as a mystic heavenly fog, not as a random life choice, but as the fulfillment of a 6,000-year homing beacon.
They had to be in that exact location, in that exact fog, to deliver the decryption key and initiate the Sabbath millennium.
Taking a step back to look at the entire architecture of this text, it is a wild intellectual journey.
It really is. We started by discarding the idea of literal scriptures, treating them instead as time-locked encrypted files, waiting for a hyper-specific decoder.
Right, and then we examined the physics tests and the literal geographic anchors required to validate that decoder, which then allowed us to apply the cipher.
A cipher that revealed that heaven and earth and the singing trees are simply grand metaphors for humanity itself.
Which completely dismantled the idea of a spiritual afterlife in the clouds, replacing it with the promise of an earthly capitalist utopia.
Where rejuvenated humans live for 10,000 years, planting their own eternal vineyards, as a 6,000-year cycle of suffering finally expires.
It is a breathtakingly massive framework.
Right.
And, engaging with a text like this, regardless of whether you embrace the theology or completely reject its premises, it forces a fundamental reevaluation of how we read the past. It demands we ask if we have been taking ancient metaphors too literally. And perhaps more importantly, it makes us interrogate our ultimate hopes for the future of our species. Like, do we look to heal and remain on the earth, or are we destined to leave it behind?
Which leaves you, the listener, with a final, lingering question to turn over in your own mind. We spent this entire deep dive unpacking a grand promise of an eternal earthly utopia. But strip away the theology for a second and think about the reality of that offer.
The actual reality of living forever.
Right. If you were genuinely handed the chance to live physically on Earth for 10,000 years, watching centuries pass like a giant redwood tree, never transitioning to a spiritual realm, never exploring the stars, would you actually take it? Or does the beauty, the urgency, and the deep meaning of human life fundamentally rely on the very fact that it eventually ends?